right, so we're gonna jump into like, how do you find the best location for your clinic? I want to start like ask a question in the question box, like like I want to hear from the community in the group right now. What is the number one factor you choose when you decide your next location? You could type that in the question box. Competition, how many people are there? Population, ease of access, close to docks, transit, potential traffic, visibility. Wow, Paul, do you see any here that like you find interesting?
I actually really like all of them. I like the one where it's about visibility, right? And we can kind of get into this a little bit later, but for me, if nobody knows that you exist, that is a real big problem, especially if it's a startup, right? People need to understand that you exist. So I look for areas that are high traffic, easy access. I like the idea of population, but again, if nobody knows you exist, you could be in the biggest city in the world with absolutely no competition. But if you're, let's say you're on a busy street or high traffic area and you have great signage, then ultimately people will understand that you exist and will be able to come, right?
Okay. Yeah, no, this is good. Like, it seems like we got a lot of like well-seasoned owners here. Like they have some really good comments here. So let's go one by one. Local competition, right? Paul, do you want to talk about this? Like we talk about this all the time, like the ratio of like how many people like of residents to a clinic, right?
Yeah, I think this number has changed quite a bit over time. But what we used to look for is locations where the ratio of, let's say per capita to clinics was about 10,000 to 1. So 10,000 people to every one clinic in a certain area, right? I think that number's actually gone down to about half because the competition has gotten a lot more fierce. So now it just can't be about, number of people per, or number of residents per clinic. It's really about, okay, there has to be a certain baseline. So anywhere between 5,000 to 7,000 people per location, but then you have to have something else to add to that mix. So maybe you have a great, social media presence or marketing initiative or whatever it is. You got to have both those things, right? So
what's your thoughts, Daryl?
Yeah, I think, no, I agree with Paul. I think the other consideration too is the type of business that you're going to start. So if you're going to go in and you're going to start a niche practice, it probably gives you a little bit more flexibility around the actual per capita number, because you're going to go in there and slide in a particular, patient target population, like pelvic health or pediatrics or something like that. So I think there's also some adaptability there based on just putting a multi-display orthopedic practice.
Yeah, that's interesting. And if you see some of the trends that are going on right now, like clinics are getting more and more niche. You're seeing like more ped clinics. You're seeing more like Scully clinics, right? So, or pelvic floor or running physio, right?
Cool. But the other thing too, that my recommendation is like, with a niche clinic, you probably don't want to start super niche right off the bat because you're a startup, right? And if you start super niche, but let's say you have like really expensive rent, it's going to be hard to make that rent expense every month because, maybe the word is not out there yet that you do peds or that you do scoliosis or what have you, right? So I would actually grow into that niche versus start with a niche, right?
Yeah. Other factors you look at is like also, like who's your ideal customer, right? And where does your ideal customer hang out? And that's when you start looking at household income. Like these, areas that have like nice, like high wealthy incomes, and then like if you go some of the other like blue collar communities, like you're gonna get a lot more DevZB or you get more MBAs. Just depends on what type of your ideal client is, right?
Yeah,
like, what's your thoughts about that, Daryl?
Yeah, no, I think it's important too, because then when you're starting to look even at the competition in the area, when you're trying to set your fees and stuff like that, it's important, right? Because a lot of your fee calculations are going to need to go into what rent can you afford and stuff in that situation. So I pay a lot of attention to what that household income would be.
Yeah, and I think actually I learned this from you, Rick. One of the great things you can do is leverage what big companies are doing, in their field. So for example, Starbucks, that they're going for a very specific demographic. They're going for that 30 to 40-year-old female who is somewhat affluent, who and they're also looking for areas with lots of high traffic and lots of visibility, right? And so if you can leverage someone else's hard work and try to find very similar locations, that works as well. So I look for, you know, areas where there's lots of Starbucks to potentially put a location in, maybe Lululemon's or whatever, right? Like, so, and again, you know, for PT Health, for example, we were looking for that 30 to 40-year-old female with high income who is the decision maker for healthcare issues in their family. And that was a perfect sort of segue to us, right? If you're going for athletes, maybe you look for CrossFit gyms or what have you, right? Again, leverage some of the what some of the bigger industry players are doing outside of your industry to actually learn what they're to piggyback off their learnings, right?
Yeah, yeah, and if you're like in Calgary, for example, you see all these like expanding little communities now, right? And in there, like there's a Starbucks, or there's a grocery store, and you got the liquor store, right? And you know, I've seen a lot of these type of clinics where like when the ratio of clinics, residents to clinics makes sense, like these are running like $2-3 million businesses, right? You know, in
And
the suburbs.
and that's a great point. You know, there's a place in Calgary, the southeast, huge population of young families, kind of the perfect, you know, demographic. And I've heard from other clinic owners who've opened up there that within a year or two, they are actually packed to the seams, right? And so
Yeah.
you want to start yourself off on a fast footing that way.
Yeah, cool. And Daryl, you're a big fan of working with like doctors and being in close vicinity or inside medical clinics. Like, you know, this is another reason. Like, you want to share more about that?
Yeah, no, I think it's just one of those scenarios where you just want to look at where can you start to leverage some of your referrals at the same point as you're doing your direct to consumer marketing. So for me, one of the things that we'll do is I'll actually do a map myself to figure out how many, you know, GPs or specialists are around in a given area of where I want to put a dot in the map. So I kind of look at what Paul was saying is, you know, I look for, you know, miles or landmarks in the area, and then I'll try to figure out, well, how many docs are around. So it just gives me a secondary ability to build lead gen.
Yeah, I remember that one of the clinics I started in Burnaby. The only reason I started it was because we were renting space off like the busy walking clinic, right? You know, it gave us 3,000 square feet, and it was a busy walking clinic that was seeing 400 patients a day. And by the way, that's a pretty decent sized walking clinic. And literally in 9 months, that clinic was doing $1 million because of the
Mm-hmm.
medical clinic. And there was actually lots of local competition nearby. But I had a personal relationship with like the docs that it made it so easy to start up a clinic. It was a no-brainer.
Yeah,
I think that's like,
oh, go ahead, Paul.
No, go ahead, Daryl.
I think just the one piece that I would say is, you know, having clinics in the medical, you know, clinics as well, especially the walk-in. The one error I've made in the past though is I had the clinic at the far back of the building, right? So you have to really build a relationship with the docs. Say, no, that, you know, that rehab clinic's around the corner, as opposed to having that front end access where they're sitting in a waiting room for multiple hours, right? And they're actually seeing you. So I think visibility in a medical clinic where you know you're going to pay some higher rent is going to be critical. And that was the one error I've made in the past.
So don't have a clinic in the basement.
No, well, it wasn't in the basement. It was way around the back corner where no one was going.
Right, totally. Cool. And then we talked about this, like neighboring businesses, like the Starbucks, the liquor stores, or grocery stores, right? And you see that pop in a lot of like the expanding communities where like there's young families, right? So busy roads and intersections. Paul, you're a big fan of this.
I'm a huge fan of this. So in terms of busy roads and intersections, it's a great opportunity for signage, right? And I have this thing where if you could get a sign, I don't know how many of you are from Ontario, but like, you know, there's this place called Honest Ed's, and they take pretty much they take up the entire block of this one street in Toronto, and it's like the most gaudy, light-filled. You know, if you go to Vegas, old school Vegas kind of looks like that, but you can't miss it, right? And it's on a busy street. And you know, I'm not saying you have to go that gaudy, but ultimately, if you have a busy road or intersection and you have signage, that could actually equate to actually 2 to 3 referrals a week, right? On top of all the other marketing stuff that you're doing. That's huge, right? When your signage is doing work for you while you're not actually doing work, like it's passively bringing in your referrals, that's a big thing. So busy roads and intersections, even you know, what do you call it, like sandwich boards on busy roads and intersections. People are waiting at a stoplight, they see your sign, they see your phone number, and they just call you right away. So those things are really important to me.
Yeah, totally. Like these high traffic like areas, high density, right?
Yeah. Oh, the other thing too is like, you know, we built clinics along this ring road, or we built clinics along, you know, sky trains, or you know, anywhere where there's like, you know, heavy bus traffic. Um, and so again, the reason for that is because people, when people are looking, they're looking, well, how is this easy to access on my way home from work, or on my way to work, or when I'm traveling, right? And so if you could, you know, situate a clinic off of a busy highway, and it's an off ramp, and it's on their way home from work, then there's a lot higher chance that you know, they'll come to your clinic.
Okay, cool. There's a couple of questions in the question box about like how do you make relationships with doctors. That's a whole another section. So let's save this one for like a future webinar or something we might actually do in our community, right? So sounds cool. Yeah, and we talked about that big signage. You know, I'm a big fan of free parking. You know, like whether you're rich or poor, everyone hates parking, even if it's $1 or $2, right? And so if you could find a space that offers free parking, like that to me is gold. I'm curious right now, like maybe in the question about who actually has free parking in their clinic. Maybe type in yes or no. Okay. All right, a lot of yeses. Yeah, free parking, man. It makes compliance of treatment plans way easier. If you want someone coming two, three times a week, like that free parking is a big deal. And sometimes like if you're in a highly densely area like in Toronto or Vancouver where like you're in the core, you don't have a solution, like you don't have an option, like that's a little different. But if you're running a clinic not in there, like free parking is ideal.
Yeah, and I think, Rick, that would be my piece to Paul's. You know, I'm a big fan of the busy roads and intersections as well, but I think it's important that there's parking accessible, because if you're in a busy street and you have like street parking, it's tough. And really outside of Vancouver and downtown, you know, you got to look for those types of convenience things for your patients. Otherwise, it becomes a nuisance and people don't like that obstacle.
Yeah, paid
Yeah, and
parking is a non.
that's why in these expanding communities, like when you start seeing all these like all these businesses kind of like work together, like the Starbucks, the liquor store, grocery store, like if you're kind of in those type of environments, like the parking's all free there, right? So it makes it
Which is
super
a great
easy.
point. It's a great point too. Like if you're starting a clinic in, let's say, one of these expanding communities, um, you know, even if there is free parking, you have to make sure there's enough parking, right? Because I've seen scenarios where the plaza, for example, is super busy and there is just nowhere to park, even though it's free parking. And that becomes an annoyance for your patients. So when you're talking about treatment planning and getting people to actually come, you know, for their entire treatment plan, if they're annoyed every time they come, there's a good chance that they'll self discharge, right? So you got to be kind of aware of that.
Yeah, and then what you know we'll talk about in the well we could address it now, but like when it comes to parking, you also have to factor in like parking for your staff, right? So if you have 10, 15 people working in your clinic, that's going to be 10, 15 extra parking spaces, right? On top of like parking spaces you need for your
It's
clients,
a great
right? You
point.
know,
Yeah,
so
Rick, we actually had to back out of a medical clinic to put a rehab space in, because medical clinic's super busy. Parking lot was actually quite small, and the growth of the clinic would have had at least 8 staff using 15 parking spaces that we
Yep.
were given, right? So I think became actually a deal breaker for us, because it became a barrier for patients.
yeah, that's yeah. So there's a question, or Corey says, if you have everything on this list minus the free parking, do you still think it's worth looking at the lease?
Yeah, I mean, I would say no, and the reason is because most people, and it also depends where you are. So if you're in Toronto where you have easy access through trains and that sort of thing, different story. But and there's a lot of foot traffic, different story. But if you're, let's say, in a community, most people are driving, right? And again, your longevity, your growth in the business depends on the people, you know, who are going to come for their treatment plans and finish their treatment plans. Anything you could do to take away that friction, I would, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. We've seen a couple of clinics where it was free parking, Paul, remember, and then it turned paid. We saw a
Yes,
massive impact in the business. I was like, oh my, and
huge.
the parking was just like an
Yeah,
extra $1, $2, right? But
yeah.
that was enough like
Well,
friction,
we
right?
even paid for their parking, right? We paid the $1 or $2, but our business still went down 30-40% in gross revenue, right? So I know we're spending a lot of time on this, and it feels kind of like a small, like it's a small issue, but it's not. It's really important, right?
Yeah, and I think we've done it too, where I've entertained leases where we actually pay for the parking, like Paul's saying, but our administrator spends half of our day running out to and from to get tokens in order to give it to patients. So it actually is
Yeah,
really disrupting from
yeah.
standard work and daily operations.
Yeah, and Blair here brings up a good point. Just raise your prices to cover the parking. Like if you like a lot of times you might have a great space and like you got the docks and like everything is perfect and you know you're gonna get bullet referrals. I wouldn't stop doing the deal if like you don't have free parking. So you just have to find a way to like, make it easy for your patients. So you could do what Blair says where, add it to your price and then, like add that $3 to your price and it'll pay for parking itself, right? But I don't think it should be necessarily a deal breaker. If you know that from day one you're gonna get like 20 referrals a week, like why would you not do it because of like parking? So,
If you can
but
try
this,
to convince the property management group not to put parking in, that's an option too.
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah.
cool. All right, is this making sense? We're gonna move on. If this is making yes, maybe type yes in the chat in the question box, please. Okay, good. All right, and if you love it, give me a 10, or if it's okay, give me a 1. All right, does he tens? Oh, 9? Oh, Carl, come on. Okay, Justin, thank you. Okay, cool. Let's move on. All right, so next one is if you're gonna like for the ones of you have like you already have a location, for your second or third or fourth location, my suggestion is to take all the patients from your EMR, like the postal code, and plot it on a map, right? Like there's lots of tools you can do that on Google Maps, right? And then this way you can start seeing like where your patients actually live and decide like where you should do your next location, right? And you might be surprised on how many of your active patients actually live in an area that you didn't think they would live. So, and that might be good reasoning to help you set up your second location. This is a pretty cool tip. Okay. Um, for the ones that have multiple clinics, does that make sense? Is that a good tip? Are you guys gonna use that one?
Yeah, and I think part of it too is like, when you do plot it, just to give you sort of a visual, you're going to start to see that there's a sort of a densely packed area right around your clinic. And let's say you have this overflow of patients that you just don't know what to do with. The idea is to actually pick a clinic just outside or just within that range. So let's say it's a 5-kilometer range, right? Just, open up your second location just outside of that range so that, you could either start pushing people towards that clinic, or at least giving them the option, right?
Yeah, like I think that's a great tip. Like I've seen, like if for the ones you actually run a scoreboard and you have like your metrics, you'll know how much like new patients you're actually booking in, and if you combine that with like your map and you combine how many missed opportunities you have like over the phones and on your scoreboard, you can very easily have a predictable way to be able to determine like whether you should start a clinic nearby.
Yeah.
Right. I've seen a lot of people do well with that.